And we are starting our webinar now. We're going to wait a few minutes and allow everyone to arrive in the room. We are broadcasting live on Facebook and have many hundred people showing up here for this webinar today. We're so excited to share the evening with Rameshwar, Mirabai Starr, Cobb, and others. And I'll say more in a few minutes, but just welcome everyone. Hold tight while everybody arrives. We'll start in a few minutes. Well, I think that we'll get started. Kestrel and I can say a few words and people will arrive as they arrive. So welcome everyone to virtual Llama Foundation. I'm going to let Kestrel here say just a few quick words about Llama, and then I'll introduce our panelists. Kestrel?
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. So yeah, charged with the not so easy task of talking about what Llama is. For those of us who are familiar with it, we oftentimes will describe it as a mystery school. But at its core, Llama is an intentional community and retreat center. It was founded in 1968, so we've been around for about 53 years now. And probably what's more pertinent to our discussion today was one of the first places that Ram Dass taught retreats here in the States. Actually one of the first retreat centers here in the States. And so right now we have 14 year-round residents who kind of, myself being one of them, who hold the fort down here and serve retreats over the summertime and then do a lot of deep work throughout the rest of the year. We are dedicated to interspirituality. So as a community, we don't have like a one religious tradition or guru or anything like that we kind of orbit around. So you'll find practices from every tradition being honored and respected here. So maybe that's kind of like Llama in a nutshell, just kind of like very briefly. But we encourage anybody who's interested or curious to check us out on Facebook or check us out on our webpage to learn more about us.
Thank you, Kestrel. That was a challenge I gave you. 2 minutes or less. So Asha Greer was going to be with us tonight, but she is not able to join. Cobb has last minute agreed to come and tell some stories and join us in conversation. So we're so very happy to have him with us. At the end of this evening, so there's going to be a reading, some conversation, time for Q&A. So if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A dialogue. You'll notice this is webinar format, so there are a lot less controls at the bottom of your screen, but if you see the Q&A there, you're welcome to type your questions in, and depending on how many we have hopefully will answer your question and all questions. And at the very end of our evening, we have a really exciting and special surprise from the Llama residents. So please stick around for that. It's just a short, wonderful thing they're going to present. So please stick around for the whole thing. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mirabai Starr. Mirabai is a longtime Llama community member, and she is joining us as an author herself, as a teacher, and as someone who is very close to Ram Dass in his life. And she's going to be sort of moderating the conversation this evening between herself, Rameshwar Das, excuse me, and Ahad Cobb. So I'm going to take myself off spotlight here and turn the floor over to you guys.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
And thanks,
Sweet to
Kestrel.
be here.
Thanks, Tracy, for working so hard behind the scenes and making all of this stuff come into manifestation. So we're very grateful. And Ahad, thank you for stepping in at the last minute for Asha. It's very courageous and generous of you.
Also an author.
Yes, a Llama author. And Gangadas, my husband and I were just talking about you, Ahad, today, that we got married on the date that we got married because you did a Vedic astrology reading and told us that was the day. And so far, so good, 23 years later.
Wow.
So welcome, everyone. It's so good to have you with us in this unveiling in many ways of this beautiful book, being Ram Dass, that Rameshwar Das so lovingly compiled with Ram Dass over the course of at least 10 years, the last 10 years of Ram Dass's life. And it's perfect timing with the 50th year anniversary of Be Here Now. I have to say that I just came back from Lama Foundation, the first live thing I've done with humans in a year. We had all the COVID protocols and in place before I went up and while I was there. And I did a winter intensive with the residents, which many of us do every winter when the residents are working on kind of their own spiritual curriculum, because all summer long they're serving guests, retreats and things. And it was very special just being up there at Lama. But one of the most special parts was seeing the way the Lama residents are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Be Here Now. It's a bunch of young people, mostly under 30 living there now, 15 of them. And they're very deeply connected to spiritual practice, but they have really thrown themselves into lifting up Be Here Now and Ram Dass's legacy at Lama in such a beautiful way. And I saw this incredible pizza box that they've recreated, like the original Bindu to Oja's box in which Be Here Now first arrived around the world on the brown paper pages with all the goodies that went in that box. So they've recreated.
Give away the surprises yet.
Oh my gosh. I won't even begin to tell you. It's so special. It almost made me cry. So you'll see a little something about that at the end. And I just want to say that I'm looking out my window at snow falling, big snow coming. And I imagine at Lama, it's really coming down now. So it feels like a very auspicious gathering today. So I think that is it for now. I just want to introduce my two buddies here. Rameshwar Das is a dear friend and guru brother of mine, and he's the reason this book happened. He talked Ram Dass into it. Ram Dass was not interested in writing an autobiography of any kind, but Ramesh felt, thank God, that there were stories that had never been told, and that Ram Dass's legacy in the form of this very personal narrative of his life would be a precious gift to the world. And indeed it is. I had the great opportunity to read the manuscript in various forms as it was unfolding, and the finished product is just exquisite. So we're going to just dive into a little reading in a moment, and then we'll have some discussion, some early Lama memories, and then open it up to you all. So Ahad Cobb was there. Ahad was there as Be Here Now was being created, and the illustrations were happening at Lama in the dining room. I think mostly is spread out in that around that table. It's mostly where that happened. And
There he is.
there. Let's see. It hasn't shown up.
That's fun to find.
There
that
we go.
one.
There we go.
Okay.
Beautiful. Oh my
Did
God.
it come
That
up?
was
Okay.
that was the Ahad I knew. That's beautiful. And he was there, and I lived in community with Ahad then as a teenager when Ram Dass first started doing retreats at Lama in the early 70s. So this should be a wonderful conversation to hear some of those memories. So Ahad, maybe you could begin you picked out a couple of readings from the book. Maybe you could begin with that now.
Okay. One thing that touched me very much when I began to read this book was that Richard Alpert, when he began his journey into psychedelics, and which was all about sharing it with other people and all about expanded consciousness, very soon he moved into communal living. And both in Boston and then later in Millbrook. And this just touched me so deeply. I'd always known Ram Dass as a teacher, but here's his experience of just being a community member. So this is from the Newton commune. He says, "When I moved in, I brought along all my antiques, but communal life proved pretty hard on them. When one got trashed, which happened frequently, it felt like a friend had died. Despite that, I discovered I liked group living. I helped take care of Tim's kids and make sure the cars ran. I took care of the finances and paid the bills. We were responsible Harvard professors after all. I baked bread, as I had done in Mexico, and everybody pitched in on maintenance and dishes and cutting the grass. We all cleaned." And I did all of these things at Lama, just really touched me. And then later, they moved into, after they left Harvard, they moved into this much bigger mansion in Millbrook, which they called the Castle, to continue their researches. And here's how he describes that. "We felt as though we could transform society. We were an eclectic group of people with a higher vision for living, interacting, and problem solving with the help of a greater consciousness." Oh, and by the way, at this time that they moved into Millbrook, they also were in association with Steve and Barbara Durkee, who were living in an artist commune called USCO in Garnerville, New York. We cultivated vegetable and flower gardens. We shared chores and babysitting. We were kind of hard on the castle. We played football inside and cats and dogs and a monkey. But for the most part, communal life went pretty smoothly.
He had a pet aardvark also.
I had an aardvark named Artie, who used to nestle into me, his snout in my armpit. I baked bread as usual, maintained an eye on Jack and Susan, the kids, kept the cars running, and helped manage the bills. So Ram Dass was really doing a lot on the earth plane to keep the communal life together, as we all do. Thank you.
He told me a great story, which I think is in there somewhere, about the Newton commune. And as Lama has had its bumps in the road, the neighbors in Newton tried to get them kicked out because they said, you know, you're not, this is a single family zone. You're not a single family. And Ram Dass' father defended them before the town fathers. And he came in, he had been the chairman of the New Haven Railroad and a district attorney. So he comes in before the, you know, the town board, and he basically demonstrated that they were fit the legal definition of a family, because they shared finances and food and all of that, and they were living together as a family. They backed off and said it was legal. So they did some groundbreaking on that kind of governmental side too.
And then when Ram Dass left Millbrook, he actually lived together with Steve and Barbara again, well, or for the first time in California before he went to India.
Yeah,
So,
he and Steve went around lecturing on psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve's earlier part of his incarnation also.
Right.
And then I guess Steve and Barbara got deeply into Mayor Baba, who at one point forbade any of his devotees to use psychedelics anymore. And they're all living together. And Ram Dass is still very much, he was still Richard, and he was very much into psychedelics. So that was and there was an ensuing correspondence between Mayor Baba and Richard Alpert, which the Baba people have preserved as evidence of his wisdom about psychedelics. But then there was an LSD conference in Berkeley, and Ram Dass very publicly took one more dose of LSD than Mayor Baba said he was allowed. And the Mayor Baba people were picketing the conference. This is the kind of 60s politics that came into the picture at that time.
Lama famously had a couple of teachers say in the beginning that we're happy to be guides for you, but only if there's no use of
Herman Rednick,
Herman Rednick.
Yeah.
No use of any mind-altering substances. And I don't know, the legend, the lore is that Lama went from like 35 people to 5 people overnight.
I met Herman at one point, I think.
Oh.
He painted great sunsets, as I remember.
Yes, he was quite a painter.
Yeah.
That's great. I didn't know that, Ramesh.
Well, yeah.
Should I read a little bit of Should I read a little bit about early Lama?
Yeah.
Yes, please, Mirabai.
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, so Ram Dass at this point was in relationship with a woman named Caroline, who he loved very much, but you know was not someone who really stayed in committed relationships with women or men, and both of whom he was in relationship with over the course of his life. But for this time they were together, they were traveling. And he says, that same spring, Caroline and I decided to take a break from New York. Steve and Barbara Durkee had left Los Altos, California, and were moving north of Taos, New Mexico, where they had purchased land for the commune we'd all dreamed of. It was called the Lama Foundation, after the cluster of homes down the mountain. In Spanish, at least the local Spanish, it's Lama is mud, or even slime, after the spring mud season and the thick mud used to make the adobes for the buildings. The Durkees invited us to visit. Caroline and I flew to California to pick up the blue bus, and together we drove through Arizona and New Mexico. We camped and stopped at various festivals, and as soon as people heard I was there, they'd line up to speak with me about psychedelics. It was a fun odyssey. After meeting the Durkees in Santa Fe, we went up to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains to see the property north of Taos at 8,600 feet. Herman Rednick, a mystic painter who became a spiritual mentor for the Lama Foundation, had helped find the land. A friend, Jonathan Altman, a Zen and Tai Chi practitioner who lived near us in Los Altos, assisted in buying it. The land, outside the hamlet of Cuesta, was sacred to the Taos Pueblo Indians. We met with them, everyone sitting outdoors in chairs, dressed in our Sunday best. Lama would be a self-sustaining, intentional community and a spiritual school. All spiritual traditions would be honored. The Taos Pueblo and Native American church elders also became mentors. Since there were no buildings on the property yet, Carolyn and I lived in the bus. And that bus is still there, and people still sleep in it.
There it is.
You have the blue bus.
Let's see.
There it is.
Yeah, the blue bus was it's in that song from the Who, but it's a Mayor Baba thing.
Right.
And that was why they bought the blue bus, I think.
Oh, wow. It's so fun to have the inside scoop. So just one more paragraph. That same summer, the Durkees began building Llama Foundation. Caroline stayed to help, digging trenches for the first water pipes and making adobe bricks. As the buildings came together, she let the Durkees take her place on the bus. Steve and Barbara had 2 daughters by then and later would have 2 more. Many of us have come and gone at Llama Foundation over the intervening years, but the bus remains there as a dwelling. And also on that same trip, Ramdas and Caroline had Ramdas's cat, Namla, who was very young then. And Namla lived at Llama. In fact, Ahad, you definitely lived with her, as did I. Tracy, she might have even still been alive when you were there. Namla lived to the age of 23.
Really?
And she was beloved at Llama all those years. Beautiful.
Ramdas
long
spoke
hair.
of her very fondly.
He loved her.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why he kept coming back to Llama, to see Namla.
Long, white-haired, blue-eyed
Yeah.
cat.
Oh, really? A real temple cat.
She was friend to everyone.
Wow.
She would come around and visit the houses, just like Ramdas. And those who treated her kindly, she came more, but she never settled down with anyone.
He had 2 cats on Maui later that he was very fond of. I probably can find a photo of the last one, Kush. They were named for Ram's children, Lav and Kush. But they got, especially Kush, got very fat, didn't move around so much. He was a fat cat. Let's see if I have another couple of llama slides before we go off into. Is that coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's from about 1974.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Ahad again.
Yeah, there I am.
And there's Ramdas.
Ramdas.
And Turkey girls.
Yep. And that's our friend KK Shah. He was there from India visiting.
Amazing.
Okay, that's good. Back to reality.
Ramesh, do you want to do a reading at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to read the piece about how Be Here Now came to be.
Yes.
I think that would be fun. Let me see if I can get that up here. So this starts in the first year after Ramdas came back from India. And he started giving a few talks, and this starts with a series that he gave in New York City. Later in March of 1969, I was invited to speak at the sculpture studio owned by an artist, William Bowie, on East 77th Street in Manhattan. I sat in front of one of his pieces, a metalwork sunburst. I gave a series of lectures over 16 consecutive nights, and as word got out, the audience kept growing. 40 people showed up the first night, then 50, then 70. I didn't plan what I would say. At the start of each evening, I meditated with earplugs that Haridas had made for me. I cleared my mind and opened myself to Maharaji, using his mantra, Ram, 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 Ram. Then I picked up my tambura and started chanting to the droning overtones, mantras I'd learned from KK or Bhagwan Das at times, to melodies I made up. Sometimes I sang in English or organized rounds with Kyrie eleison. Often we chanted Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, the mantra Hanuman is said to be always singing. I shared what I'd learned in the months at the ashram using the diary I kept in Kenchi and quotes I collected from holy books as jumping off points. These quotes were from Buddhist and Hindu and Sufi and Christian esoterica, like the Philokalia from the Greek Orthodox tradition or the teachings of the Essene Desert Fathers. I talked about being present in each moment of life. And I did my best to answer audience questions. I talked about how the going up and coming down of psychedelics had ultimately been dissatisfying for me. To stay in my heart, I needed a strong, consistent spiritual love. The discontinuity between states I'd experienced on LSD was only resolved when I met Maharaji. For a being in that state, sahaj, stitya, samadhi in yogic terms, there is no discontinuity. As Maharaji often said, sub-ek, it's all one. Some people got high as I talked. I got high too, but not from psychedelics. I was stoned with love. Maharaji was coming through me. I loved my audience and they reciprocated. It was a shared consciousness, intimate and powerful at the same time. Near the end of the series, a woman named Lillian North came up and handed me a thick stack of transcripts from the talks. She was a court stenographer and had transcribed them all. I was about to set out for the West Coast, where I'd been invited to teach a meditation workshop at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. I put the pile of manuscripts in the trunk of my trusty 37 Buick. Esalen, which was founded in 1962 as a retreat center, was already a hub for the human potential movement. Friends like Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts had lectured there at its seminars designed for learning and insight. They were in some ways like the workshops I once helped organize for the Castalia Foundation. That was the Millbrook organization, sort of, that they had started to sponsor the research. I'd first been invited with Tim Leary in 1964 after Esalen's co-founders, Michael Murphy and Dick Price, attended one of our lectures in San Francisco. We ran an LSD session for them. Now I was returning to run a workshop as Ram Dass. I stopped in San Francisco where I saw Owsley, who had been making White Lightning LSD and was the Grateful Dead's sound engineer, and Stuart Brand and Alan Watts, who was back from Japan, staying on his houseboat in Sausalito. And I stopped by to see him too. When I finally got to Esalen, they told me I was staying with a writer, John Bleibtreu, and his wife, Caddy, down the road. John was a former stockbroker whose book about environmental issues, Parable of the Beast, had just come out and was getting good reviews. As he was pulling my suitcase out of the car, John noticed the stack of transcripts in my trunk. He said, "What's that?" I told him, and he asked if he could take a look. After reading through them all, he said he thought there were some good stories. He marked the passages he liked. Curiously, the sections he'd picked turned out to be moments when I'd completely disappeared into the collective awareness at the sculpture studio. "You know, there's a hell of a book here," he said. And then after Esalen, Ram Dass goes on to Lama. And this is, I guess, the later in 69, maybe the beginning of 1970. By this time, Lama was an impressive work in progress. The residents had built a geodesic dome complex along with a kiva-like prayer room. There was also an octagonal kitchen building with an upstairs dining area. They had incorporated Lama Foundation with the stated purpose of, quote, serving as an instrument for the awakening of consciousness, and they welcomed spiritual seekers. The residents, self-styled Lama Beans, lived on the grounds and pitched in with construction, gardening, and cooking. I ran Lama's first spiritual retreat and my first as Ram Dass. It was a 7-week winter retreat for Lama residents and a few of my students. We were up at 8,600 feet in the cold, crystalline air of New Mexico, looking over the ancient seabed of the Rio Grande Basin. We saw breathtaking sunsets. Each participant lived in seclusion for a week in an individual cabin. Every day I'd go around in the snow and visit each soloist. The cabin became the mind world of the person inhabiting it. Together we worked on individual practice. I also delivered food, which I loved doing because it reminded me of Maharaji, who was always giving out prasad. After the retreat, a big picture of Maharaji went up in the kitchen where he became a presence in the lives of Lama Beans from then on. Participants also came to my cabin to check in and talk. There was a bell at the bottom of my cabin stairs. The person leaving would ring the bell at the end of the interview so the next person could come. It was like a Zen dokusan. Some of the Native American elders who'd helped with the community's development came up to visit, including little Joe Gomez of the Taos Pueblo. He was an early mentor for Lama. After Steve had designed the dome complex, little Joe had directed its construction. Because the land was a sacred site, a part of the heritage of Native Americans, it was important to all of us that we receive their spiritual input on how the land should be used. Later, we attended peyote ceremonies at the Native American church down the mountain. We were forming a bond that remained an important current in the stream of spiritual teaching flowing through Lama. Another person who came to Lama was Carolyn Winter, my ex. After her architectural tour of India, she'd gone to London to take care of her mother, who was sick with cancer, and then returned to the US. We'd reconnected briefly in Big Sur when I was teaching at Esalen, and realized we both planned to be at Lama at the same time, a sweet coincidence. I saw it all as Maharaji's doing. There was a poignant feeling between us. Caroline eventually went to see Maharaji herself, and he named her Rukmini after Krishna's spouse. She married someone else and has a daughter. We retain great affection for each other. When I first arrived at Lama, Steve took my bags out of my car and noticed the transcripts of the sculpture studio talks still sitting in my trunk. As John Bleibtreu had, he asked, "What's that?" Steve read them. Steve read them with care, paying attention to the passages that John had marked. He was also inspired. Like Steve, several of the Lama Beans were artists. Tenny Kimmel, later Sharada Singer, Jodi Dwarka Bonner, Hans Sadiq von Briesen and his then wife, Frances Nura. And of course, Asha was one of those artists also.
And Susan, who's here with us
Susan
tonight.
Ross, yeah. So we'll try and add them in the next printing. I'm constantly apologizing for omissions as I go along. I think there will be another printing, so we'll fix some things. Over dinner, we began to brainstorm ways that the passages could be illustrated and turned into a book. We decided to create a 12 by 12 inch corrugated box like a pizza box, containing a book, photos of Indian saints, a reading list, and an LP vinyl record of kirtan chanting. A do-it-yourself kit for awakening. The book was titled From Bindu to Ojas, meaning from material to spiritual energy. The book would tell the story of my journey to Maharaji and include a how-to for yoga and spiritual practices called a spiritual cookbook. I worked on the text for each page, and when I was done, Steve would take it to the artists. I'd like to work on that one would say, and get to illustrating. Steve coordinated the design and production. The pages were printed on brown paper and hand-bound with twine. I went out touring and lecturing to raise the money to produce From Bindu to Ojas boxes. Over the next several months, I spoke in California, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut. I spoke on college campuses and at churches. I was invited to speak at the Maharaji Foundation, the famed psychiatric clinic in Topeka, Kansas. I also lectured at the Alternative Media Conference at Goddard College in Vermont, a gathering of underground reporters, radio DJs, record company promoters, cartoonists, musicians, and poets. The Hog Farm, the hippie commune that helped run Woodstock a year earlier, led by peace activist and clown Wavy Gravy, ran a campsite for the conference. One participant, the program director of a progressive FM station in Montreal, had been playing my talks on the air practically nonstop for months. His name was Mitchell Marcus, now Raghu Marcus, who heads our Love Serve Remember Foundation. Around us, the country was being whipsawed. The first Earth Day was held in April 1970, inaugurating a new love for the environment, only to be followed a month later by the devastating National Guard shootings of unarmed student protesters at Kent State in Ohio. The search for meaning and answers felt more pressing than ever. At each talk, I told people about From Bindu to Ojas and handed out postcards they could send in to Lama to secure a free copy. The money from my lectures covered printing and production costs, and that spring, we mailed out about 1,000 boxes. But so many people were sending in requests that we quickly ran out. We did another printing, but demand was still outpacing what we could produce. So Steve reached out to a guy in New York who had attended one of my talks at the Universalist Church, a sales manager for Crown Publishing named Bruce Harris. After the talk, Bruce had come up and asked if I'd thought about writing a book and given me his card. Now, I actually had a book. Bruce flew to Albuquerque and met us at a Ramada Inn. Steve and I spread out the artwork for the core book on the 2 double beds. Bruce loved it so much that he took one of the boxes back to New York to show his boss at Crown. His boss, also his publishing mentor, said, well, okay, let's show it to the editor-in-chief and see what he says. The editor said, there's no way you should publish all this drug stuff. This guy is notorious. It will blacken our name as publishers. Bruce went home, and the next day he went into his boss's office. He said, look, there's 3 ways we can do this. We can publish the book, or we can do a distribution deal, or I'm going to quit. His mentor looked up in surprise and saw that Bruce was serious. He replied, okay, We'll work something out. Crown distributed the book. Bruce didn't think From Bindu to Ojas would fly as a title, and he suggested the simpler Be Here Now. We agreed. The first printing of 7,500 copies sold out quickly. When Bruce saw a young man reading it on the subway, he knew it would do well. Little did we know that Be Here Now would become a catalyst for an entire generation. It went on to sell more than 2 million copies. It was carried in the backpacks of thousands of people on their spiritual journeys. It would be called the Counterculture Bible and influence seekers as varied as Steve Jobs, George Harrison, and Michael Crichton. Be Here Now is the book Maharaji gave his blessing for. And I know there are lots of alternative versions of how Be Here Now came into being. I've heard some from Sadiq and some other things from Asha, and I'm sure Susan had some, I know she's got some different takes on it also. So it's fun, but it's clear that it has done its work spreading Maharaji around. And there's another funny excerpt of which I don't think I'm going to have time to read, but about when Ram Dass first showed it to Maharaji in India, the first printing of the actual book, the purple cover was sent to India, and it was read to Maharaji. And Ram Dass was thrilled that Maharaji was going to see his book. And the next day he got called in and Maharaji said, you're telling lies. And Ram Dass was very taken aback. And he was, but this is your book, Maharaji. And it turned out that he had described an episode which he had attributed to Haridas Baba, who was his yoga teacher in the ashram in India, and by then had traveled to the States and was staying at Lama. So Ram Dass had mixed up an episode with Haridas and Maharaji, and he had said Haridas had left home and gone to the jungle when he was 12 years old. And actually it had been Maharaji who had done that. And Haridas had been working in the forestry department. Maharaji said, well, you got to change this. I mean, you know, it's okay. You made a mistake the first time, you didn't know, but now that you know, you have to change it. So Ram Dass takes the bus back to the town, and he telegraphs Steve, and he gets a telegram back from Steve saying, the book has just gone to the presses again. I can't change this printing. And Ram Dass goes back to Maharaji, and Maharaji says, he tells Maharaji that it's already gone to the printer, and it would, if they change it, they're going to have to throw away this whole printing, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And Maharaji said, money and truth have nothing to do with each other. Change it. So the rest of the story is Ram Dass telegraphs Steve again. There's a lot of traveling back and forth on buses and telegrams that take a long time to get up to Lama, where there's no telephone. And then Steve has to drive back to Albuquerque to the printer. And he gets to the printer, and the printer says, well, something very strange happened. We had to take it off the presses. There was this plate, and we can't find either there's damage to the plate, to that page, and we can't find the original. And that page had a picture of Maharaji on it. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. Let's do some questions or something.
These are such great stories, Ramesh. I mean, that's the thing about this book, and you speaking about this book. there are stories that none of us really have heard, or very few of us have heard, that are coming out. And so Ram Dass's legacy is so alive in these stories. It's beautiful. And before we open it up to some exchange with you all, Ahad, do you have any recollections you'd like to share about that, maybe that early time of when the artwork was being done, or those early years when Ram Dass was coming to Lama and doing those first retreats?
Okay. But in terms of the origins of Be Here Now, just this brief passage from the book, 3 years before Be Here Now was published, Hari Das said to Ram Dass, Hari Das says, Maharaji gives you his Ashirvad for your book. Ram Dass said, what's Ashirvad and what book? Ashirvad means blessing. This blessing for a book was quite unusual. Maharaji was notorious for not allowing anyone to write about or publicize him. People who did so often end up being transferred, never again seen in the circle of devotees, or they couldn't get darshan, couldn't get to see him. What was this book I was supposed to write?
Yeah.
So he goes back and he actually tries writing a travelogue of his time in India, and no publisher has any interest in it whatsoever. And unfortunately, we've never found the original of that, what that manuscript was, because I've looked for it, but it seems to be lost to eternity, which is probably Ram Dass would be pleased about.
So the two very, very powerful influences in the first couple of years of Lama were Ram Dass and also Murshid Samuel Lewis, who had visited Lama in the summer of 69 and the summer of 70, and really was very enthusiastic about Lama Foundation. And when he died suddenly in the winter of 1971, his wish was to be buried at Lama Foundation. He had lived his whole life in California, most of it, but these were his wishes. And this was happening at the same time that Be Here Now, From Bindu to Ojas, excuse me, the cardboard box was being published.
Yeah, it must have been like the second printing or something.
Yeah.
It was going out, yeah.
So there was this, there's this amazing scene at Lama in the middle of the winter in the dome. There was no fire room, there was no fireplace. It was, totally cold. And the whole perimeter of the dome was lined with stacks of the From Bindu to Ojas boxes waiting to be mailed out.
Wow.
And they brought Murshid Sam in by car from California, and he was laid in the center of the dome for a couple of days. I don't know how long it was.
Good place to keep a body on ice, I guess.
Yeah. In the middle of this amazing transmission of Maharaji's grace. The reason he was laying so long there was the ground was frozen solid.
Yeah.
And it took them, forever to dig a hole into the ground enough to bury him.
Wow.
So there was this this interesting convergence of these two spiritual streams at that moment, and which still continues.
It does.
I had my own convergence with that because I was a gopher on, there's a film called Sunseed, which probably a number of you are aware of if you're old enough. But it featured Sam in it, and I was a what's called a gopher. They want you to do something and you go for it. So, but I was in California when they were filming Sam, And the photographer was this amazing photographer, had mostly done still photography, named Robert Frank, who's also in the film a bit, but he was in the middle of the Sufi dances with this gigantic Arriflex camera on his shoulder, kind of twirling around in the middle of the dances, trailing Sam as he led people through the dances of universal peace.
Wow.
And it's a fun darshan of Sam also, that film,
Yeah.
where he's cooking breakfast for people in Novato.
Thank you for that, both of you. It's a really super important convergence for Lama, because as Ahad said, those two teachers, Ramdas and Murshid Sam, were probably the primary, certainly the earliest guiding teachers for Lama, and continue to, their transmission continues to be carried at Lama every day.
It's interesting that
Through
they're both
Ramdas
so
Karaki.
eclectic also,
Yes.
because Sam was also a Zen master, among other things from his
Yes.
training.
Jewish
Jewish Zen
Christian-
master, Sufi.
Christian brother as well, by the way, from the Christian brothers. Yes.
Wow.
Thank you both. So anything else before we open it up to our friends here?
Well, I think one thing I wanted to say about kind of the, after working on this book for a long time, and honestly, I pushed the project as a way to hang out more with Ramdas. It was purely selfish in that score, and that the things that I experienced of his life, the elements that are in the book, where it's really almost like he had three incarnations in one, as a psychologist, and the psychedelic explorations, and then his years of spiritual transmission or teaching. And it was quite unique the way he could bring all that together. And I think you saw it most clearly when he worked with people individually, and probably you have experienced that, because he not only had the spiritual practice that he had worked on in so many different traditions, and primarily the yoga instruction that he first got in India, but he also had that psychological framework and the understanding of other planes of consciousness from his psychedelic work. And I think in that way, he was a good bridge between cultures and traditions, and that eclectic quality which Lama was founded on and has managed to maintain all these years, and that aspect that you work with, Mirabai, through the interspiritual movement, which is so much about bringing together traditions also. I think that's a really important stream for our culture right now.
Yes. I agree. I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not gonna right now. In terms of something we talked about at Llama this weekend, interspirituality and cultural appropriation, and waking up to white privilege around interspirituality. There are a lot of there's still
Many
a lot of growing.
dimensions of that.
A lot of growing still happening. But yes,
Yeah.
we're grateful to our teachers for bringing us these wisdom streams in such a beautiful way. So, Llama folks, Tracy, I think you are going to start collecting some questions.
Yeah, so I wanted to just say that we have people from all over the world. In fact, Geraldine Connolly just texted that she's listening in from Dublin, Ireland in the middle of the night. So it's exciting to have so many people here.
Tim's in Palenque in Mexico.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great. So we have a question from, please forgive me if I mispronounce names, from Nano. Did Ram Dass talk much about how Maharaji worked with him after Maharaji had left his body?
Yeah, he did. I mean, and it was definitely something that evolved, and it was. I was visiting Ram Dass when a telegram came from India, and it said Maharaji has dropped his bojay, and it was a telegraphic, glitch, and it meant he had left his body. And I felt fairly devastated by that. I was expecting to go back to India. I had delayed going back a bit to finish a project with Ram Dass, actually. And then, there were a bunch of us did go back, and we found a pile of ashes. And I went through a lot of grief, and clearly Ram Dass didn't go through that in the same way. I mean, I think Maharaji as a guru was not an external being for him. He saw what Maharaji had opened in him was a kind of mirror of his own deepest being. And he carried Maharaji inside in that way. And then in later years, he said he used to hang out with Maharaji in his imagination a lot. And some guy asked him about it, and the guy said, so you talk to Maharaji in your imagination?
Your dead guru. You talk to your dead guru.
Yeah, you talk to your dead guru. That was the phrase. And he said that, and he said, sure, yeah, I do. And the guy said, that's your imagination. And Ram Dass said, yeah. And it's a very, it takes you, and it has taken me as I've dealt with other deaths, including Ram Dass and my own impending sometime, to realize that there is some deeper level of being that we all exist on, that is not just this form we're fascinated by all the time and caught up with. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's what I got.
Thank you. We have Lisa Lehman wants to know if you could share any more about Ram Dass and Hari Das.
A lot of that's a mystery to me. I mean, their interaction when Ram Dass was first in India, Hari Das was assigned by Maharaji to teach Ram Dass yoga. And from all the accounts from Ram Dass, he was a wonderful teacher. But he was mauna, which means silent. He had taken a vow of silence. So all of the verbal teaching was on Hari Das' chalkboard, and he would write, kind of pithy things to Ram Dass, like the desire is the universe. Desire is Brahma, desire is Vishnu, desire is Shiva. Creation, sustenance, and destruction. desire is the universe. It's created by our desires. And that, you know, for someone who had done his master's degree in motivational psychology, that was an interesting change of view. And that whole process of learning yoga, excuse me, that's my Audubon clock in the background. Sorry, I forgot to take the batteries out. But then when Ram Dass went back to the States, something happened which I don't understand with between Hari Das and Maharaji. And Hari Das got very sick. He had been living on 2 glasses of milk a day. And from what I've heard from other people, he got some kind of an intestinal blockage and almost died. And Maharaji arranged for his treatment in a hospital. But afterwards, they parted company. And when I got to India, which was before Ram Dass had returned for the second time, and I was with Maharaji, and I asked him if I should go study with Hari Das, thinking I would be, you know, Ram Dass Mark II. And Maharaji said, if you want to do sadhana, do Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. So I was not going to become a yogi, but I had guru mantra, so I settled for that. And I did go to visit, I did see Hari Das in India once, and I visited him with Bhagwan Das, and he was staying in Haridwar. So, and he's Hari Das. But anyway, and then there was this whole Leela with Maharaji asked Ram Dass to help Hari Das get a visa and help, and he paid for his trip to the US, and then he ended up at Lama. And then there was that whole episode that I related earlier about changing the Be Here Now text. And by that time, Hari Das was at Lama. So it was a little bit, I can only call it Maharaji's sort of cosmic humor of how those things happen. And there was not much contact with Hari Das after that. And I don't think Ram Dass saw him again, really, for the rest of either of their lives.
But Hari Das was very dear to Lama. Ahad and I were both there in those days.
Yeah, he's a wonderful teacher. And he started an orphanage in India also. He was service oriented.
Ramesh, this next question, I also am excited to hear the answer to this one. Yana wants to know about the process of writing these stories down with Ram Dass. And Yana says, in my imagination, Rameshwar Das sat next to Ram Dass. As Ram Dass talked, Rameshwar Das typed things up or audio recorded them and asked prompting questions. And there's a follow-up question to this one, which is, was there anything that didn't make it into the book?
Well, your imaginary vision of how it came to be is fairly accurate. And, you know, after the stroke, Ram Dass still had pretty bad aphasia, difficulty with his speech. And I'm not the fastest typist that ever came to be, but I could pretty much keep up with his speech because it was slow. I think it was Wavy Gravy who said about him, before the stroke, he used to be the master of the one-liner. And now he's the master of the ocean liner. And it was a slow process, but I did kind of, as we went through things, and I would write things down and then I would read them back to him and kind of interview him, and we would go more deeply into some things. And really, I think that although he didn't want to really do this look back, we framed it as kind of seeing his life from what we could imagine of how it would look through Maharaji's eyes, from that place of oneness, or from outside of our normal, thinking minds, from the soul place, in other words. And I think ultimately he found it fun and helpful, especially around some of his, childhood stuff that had not really, he hadn't thought about in a long time. And there was some tough stuff between him and his mother in particular. And he had kind of this internal struggle between power and love that he worked with all of his life. And that, I think, came out more for him, and he saw it more clearly, and was, I think, the really great ability of his was to let go. He could talk about things and think about them and let them go. But in spite of his aphasia, he knew exactly what he wanted to say. And if I read something back to him, and he would say, well, that doesn't sound right. We would work on it until we got it right. And that's why it took 10 years. But something else I was going to say. Well, maybe it'll come back. I lost it.
Well, while you're musing on that, I just want to say that Asha is with us in the background.
Oh, good.
That word. So welcome, Asha. We love you. We're so glad you're here.
Can she hear us?
I heard so. You. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm in a hospital bed.
Oh my God.
It was a big surprise. I have some kind of a heart thing that happened this morning. So I guess it was so Ahad could come on. Hi, Ahad.
Hi, Asha.
Oh, I hope you get liberated from the hospital quickly.
Yeah, well, if they want to look at me for 2 days. I haven't been in the hospital for years, and so basically it doesn't,
Yeah. This
time
time
to
of our lives, we get to pay our dues in hospitals, I'm afraid.
Okay, so I don't want to take away from this whole set, but I love you, and I'm so sorry I didn't get to come and play.
Well, Asha, is there anything you want that's bubbling up that you'd like to share before you disappear?
Well, I tell you something, I've grown an enormous amount, and basically Ram Dass told me one time that he wanted me in the kitchen. He didn't want me in the crowd. And so I've always been in the crowd, but basically somehow reading his book, I'm out of the kitchen and into the crowd. I really recommend this book because it's such a revelation of so much of a change, and so much more the person that I knew than the person that everybody else knew. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about him that's really clearly real. Not everything, but mostly everything.
Yeah, I know I'm still getting complaints from people about stuff that we messed up, but we're trying to fix things, including who the artists were on the Be Here Now book.
Well, I just think basically that, yeah, no, I think the stuff that's left out is just as well left out.
Well, oh, that was the other part of that question. Was there a lot of stuff that got left out? Well, the original manuscript, when we turned it into the publisher, Mirabai knows book lengths. it was 187,000 words, which is kind of 2 books at least. And it ended up being around 130 something, so, which is still pretty big. But there were a few things that ended up on the cutting room floor.
Any great present to all of us. Really.
Asha, you know, Maharaji had they were called the Mas, and they were women who, like Siddhi Ma was the greatest example of that, the woman that cared for the ashrams after Maharaji left his body. But they were women who stayed in the back room, in the kitchen, if you want, but they took care of Maharaji, but they knew everything that was going on.
Right.
You know, all of the gossip, and they knew everything about all of us, and we didn't know a thing about them because they were always kind of behind the, you know, in the back room.
Right.
So that's a very highly honored position.
I asked him, I said, why can't I adore you like other people do? But that was his answer.
Yeah. I don't know if people know that you went back to Stanford days with him when you were his student.
Oh, well, I found him. I don't know why, but he was a teacher of the teacher of Psychology 101 when I was a freshman, and I wanted to ask a question. So I went in and ended up having him correct papers. And then we started giving little dinners, you know, where you talk about deep things like how you felt about stuff. And there were about 6 of us who used to have these beer and pizza dinners or something. And then, you know, it was really fun.
Homer Lane, was that the name of the?
Yeah, it was on Homer Lane. And then we lived, and Steve and I lived on Homer Lane with him after that.
Mm-hmm.
I traveled around and we stayed with him. And then because he and Steve had a real connection also, then he asked us to stay with him, and we rented a room in Homer Lane, and we lived there with him, and every Friday night we'd take acid. So that was a very delightful thing. I wrote all the letters that all people, he got thousands of letters because he started traveling around and giving talks. And so everybody wanted to know how to take acid freely. I mean, not freely, but in the right atmosphere. So that was a big life together. It was that year.
And you were the scribe for some of those that correspondence.
All his correspondence, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you letter, it was from me.
Oh.
How much is left in this talk?
I don't know. How much time have we? I'm not keeping track of time. I
we'll
hope
wrap-
somebody is.
We'll wrap up in about 10 minutes.
Okay, let's stop talking then, because I want to hear you all.
Okay, well, I think we should take more questions if anybody has them.
So here's a question from Will. When you reflect on your time with Ram Dass and your shared experiences throughout his legacy, is there a book, teaching, or a way that he made you feel which stands out as the most influential or inspiring to you?
Well, the primary one is I don't know. The more I have practiced and the more I have worked on those teachings, the more I realize I don't know. And being with Maharaji, you really got that, because this was a being who was reflecting back to us the deepest place that we could find in ourselves, and there were no edges to that. And Ram Dass was able to let go into that more than practically anyone. One of the practices that he gave people was what he called witnessing, which I first interpreted as kind of, because we learned Vipassana together, the Buddhist basic Southern meditation practice. And you kind of assume this sort of neutral observer point in your mind, and you get to a certain stage of concentration, and then you can kind of watch your thoughts and feelings and sensations and let them go by. And I asked him about that once, and I said, it's like that neutral observer place, the witness, right? And he said, no, it's from the soul. It's from way deeper. It's not your mind. It's from your soul. And that's helped me. And the other, I would say the other more profound part of being with him was not so much of what he was teaching, but who he was. And for me, it was around death, because I was out there working with him on Maui on the book when my daughter was killed. And well, all I can say is the worst thing for a parent is to lose a kid. There is nothing worse than that. And I have said this to people, and I don't know how to convey it really, but when we learned that she hadn't made it out of surgery and she'd been run over, and I said to him, she didn't get to finish her life. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, yes, she did. And there was that shift from, me feeling the agony of loss to seeing it a little bit more from that witness place, from the soul place. And he was able to help people see things from that deeper place. And that's a gift. And I think it didn't come easily. He did a lot of work to get there. Is that helpful?
And it wasn't aloof either, because he could also cry with you just at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. And toward those last years of his life, it became more and more about love. And I think that in the earlier time when he had, for instance, the talks that turned into Be Here Now, he was more engaged with consciousness, with the awareness. But toward the end, it was about awareness and love. And I think he felt more and more that he was dissolving into love and becoming love. And I think that, I don't know, I don't think it happened. You could feel it with him.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Ramesh. I have one more actually question that seems an appropriate follow-up, which is from Jennifer to you, Ramesh, wanting to know if you have an autobiography or one in the works. And she said she would love that.
I think I'm going back to photography, actually.
Yeah. amazing gift that you gave us all, Ramesh, to do this book with Ramdas. I mean, it was his words, it is his words, but it's also your crafting and shaping and lovingly transmitting them. I mean, I saw how hard you worked, and I'm so glad you persuaded him for all of us.
Yeah, I'm glad that I talked him into it also. But as you know, Mirabai, books are produced by a village. And I had some really good editorial help, and the people at Sounds True have really done their utmost to make this something that would really come across kind of purely.
Yeah.
I mean, they're publishers and they need to make money and sell books and stuff like that. But there's, I think it felt like something they all wanted to do.
Oh yes, they're, as Ramdas called them, they are a dharmic publisher.
Yeah.
It's not just about selling books, it's creating community. And you all have been drawn to the celebration of this book because we are community.
It does feel like extended family. And I'm feel more and more like Ramdas' life is a kind of really helpful parable for all of us on our crazy journeys.
What a beautiful description, a parable. He would like that.
I think he's kind of having fun he's around looking at it. Partly because he didn't really want to do the an autobiography or whatever you want to call it. It's so curious that he absconded just before it was published. Got off the hook. So, I mean, it's ridiculous that I'm the one doing the virtual book tour now.
You're doing great, Ramesh.
I'm like, he used to portray himself as the as Maharaji's ventriloquist dummy. This is exactly how I'm hoping I can live up to that. Anyway, are we almost over? Or can we do more questions?
Well, we have the Little Llama offering, and we want to leave a couple of minutes for that. Tracy, I'll let you guide us. Is there anything else you want to?
So it looks like the Q&A list that we've gone through it. I know Susan is here. She was one of the artists that worked on Be Here Now, and I'm not sure if she wants to pop in and
that would be lovely.
Anything. Here,
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
Spotlight here. Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Susan. Thank you.
What an incredible evening to spend time with everyone.
Nice to see you.
Oh, it's so good to see everyone. And I will say that one thing that the last time I saw Ramdas was on a screen in the Dome at the 50th anniversary. And I hadn't seen him or spoken to him for many years at that point. And I took the occasion to say thank you, to say that I had come out of Smith College and went off to Taos to be an artist. And Steve came into the post office and said, hey, you're an artist. Do you want to come help with this book? This friend of mine's coming back from India. And it was like, a change in my life that obviously changed my life forever. And, and the auspiciousness of what we're talking about tonight, I think is in Buddhist terms is called tendril. I think we are all of one mycelial interconnected being. And so, I mean, when I get to touch base with all of you, it just becomes very clear that that's what it's all about, is that we are none of us separate. And of all the people that have come up to me in my lifetime and said, that book changed my life. And I said, okay, so I'm going to tell Ram Dass, thank you for that, because it changed mine, obviously. And he said, oh, that changed my life too, in big ways. And I thought, as he kept opening up and opening up, his heart just got more and more and more open. And that was my total experience of, and then I think how blessed in this lifetime are we all to have had the chance to hang out with people when they're in that process and are willing to share it. And so I think everybody here tonight obviously has been touched in that way. And I think everybody who probably ever saw that book at least had a moment of being touched that way. And so I'm just so grateful. I feel so blessed in my life to have been, I don't know how I got there, but it was so good. And I do say that, yes, I think you need to keep it rolling, definitely. So, this is not a one generation or two generations. This is the way it's going to be from here on out.
It's interesting how many of the well, I used to be the younger generation, and now the younger generation is much younger, and are finding this useful.
Yes. Yeah.
Helpful.
And ironically, at 73, I'm doing a little bit of coaching and helping people through big life changes. And my understanding is there might be some possibility of sharing Be Here Now some more. And I think that will be another occasion for a whole new generation to touch this. And
Yes, it's happening.
About that. Very excited. So
Yay.
yeah, so blessings to everybody. It's good to see Frank, right? It was Frank at the time, right? Hi, Dog. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. How did I remember? And Mirabai I've seen once in a while through the years.
Frank and I were classmates at Wesleyan.
Which is where Ram Dass gave his first talk after India.
Yeah. So
Circles.
thank you so much, everyone. And and my prayers are for Asha, but I think it sounds like she's being herself and saying, no problem, no matter what, right? And I think that's for all of us what the lesson is, just we wake up every morning and say, hey, we're still here. What can we do today to be useful?
So I'm going to jump in because we just have a few
Well
more
done.
minutes left. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thanks,
for
Susan.
joining us.
Love you all.
I am going to share this short video we're so excited about. So the Llama residents and I got together at the turn of the year, and we're mulling over ideas of how to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Be Here Now. And we landed on the idea of creating a commemorative box. And the 4 amazing souls who are running our cottage industries right now jumped right on it and created the most beautiful thing. So, and they've made a very short video, so I'm going to share that with you now. And when we come back for our 3 panelists who have been with us all evening, if you want to say in just a few words, one teaching that has stood out to be the most powerful teaching for you, or the most meaningful, if you can pare it down, we'll end with that. So without further ado, I'm going to share this video for all of you.
Hi.
Here we go. And Susan,
No, that's what I was supposed to be doing today. I was supposed to be one of the speakers on it.
Oh, and Asha, we're going to mute you, my love.
Oh, please.
There we go. Okay, here we go. I'm excited. So
Better than the last pizza I had.
In real life, that box is just spectacular. It's
Wow, that's beautiful.
So I'll put into the chat the link so that if you'd like to check out, pre-order the box. It's being sold for a very reasonable price. All the proceeds go to support Llama Foundation, and you'll have this one of a kind. Well, actually, we're printing 500 only, so it's a limited edition. And so I will turn it back over to you guys. Oh, thank you. Llama has put that in the chat. So we'll close with just a few words from each of you, if you would be so kind.
I think one of Ram Dass's greatest gifts that you've embodied in, the two of you have embodied in this book is bringing the teachings, the love and the light, and yet, as you say, a parable, presenting his life as a parable, fully human, and like all of us, is, and this is a journey we all share together as humans moving as souls.
Yeah, one of the preliminary titles was Ram Dass, An Incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And, that seeing this as not just my life, but a lifetime, from that larger human experience perspective that way. I hope that does kind of resonate and reverberate.
And the other thing that I'm getting, I'm only halfway through the book, is just that how this love connected this being with his own deepest nature, with his own deepest love, with be love that was inherent, in this soul all the time, and just was brought forth by all these grace and all these experiences and work.
It's beautiful. That aspect of not trying, but just that combination of the immanent and transcendent that we all grapple with all the time. I think in the way that Ram Dass was able to bring that to his what he communicated to other people, of using his life experience as a teaching all the time. And some of it wasn't pretty. And he still managed to use it that way.
That's it for me too, is the messiness of the human condition. And seeing it as just as holy as anything else, so that even at the same time that he lifted up this guru for us all, Maharaji, he also never pretended to be the guru, and in some ways busted the whole guru model by just investing the human condition with the blessing of the ordinary. Ram Dass really embodied that with his self-deprecating humor and just being very forthcoming about all his, what he called schmooze, all his neuroses. And it just gave us all permission to just also be a beautiful hot mess on the path to awakening and service. And one thing we didn't talk about tonight, but the seed I want to plant as we end, is that it wasn't just about the path of awakening. It was definitely about the path of service. Yeah. And those two things were intertwined for Ram Dass. And I think he sometimes doesn't get credit, although the book does a good job. You guys do a great job of talking about that chapter of his life, which was his whole life, was very much about actively being of service.
Yeah, I think he really worked on that. And it came from Maharaji, who was had this association or was said to be an incarnation of, or any of that mix of Hanuman, who's the monkey servant of Ram, of God, in the Ramayana. And there's this one phrase in the Ramayana that goes so much to the heart of what Ramdas was about, which is at some point Ram says to Hanuman, "Who are you, monkey?" Because Hanuman has done these incredible feats of service. He's flown all the way and found Sita 800 miles away on Sri Lanka, and defeated the demon army and all that, and, burned down the city of the demon king. And Hanuman says, when I don't know who I am, I serve you. When I know who I am you. And I think that was a lot of what Ramdas was evolving towards with his identity, his ongoing identity crisis.
That's a beautiful way to end.
Mm.
When I don't know who I am, I serve you. When I know who I am you. Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you, Ahad. Thank you,
What
Tracy.
fun.
Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And thank you everyone who has joined the webinar and has watched on Facebook or will watch. We've recorded this and we'll post the recording soon for those who couldn't make it.
Asha, get good rest. Get well.
Yes.
Much love, Asha.
Love you, Asha.
Night, everyone.
Night.
Bye.
Ram Ram. Jai Sita
Ram
Ram.
Ram, Jai Siya Ram. Namaste.